Okay. Love when I'm live and my computer blocks what I need. Here we go. And welcome to another exciting episode of The Energy That Surrounds Us. I'm your host, Michael. And tonight's guest, I have been talking with backstage for a little bit. And I have to say, it's going to be a real treat tonight. You guys are in for a truly amazing episode. And hopefully, I didn't just jinx the episode, but we'll see. But it is my distinct pleasure, my honor and blessing to present to you all the amazing, talented, and wise one, Dr. Scott Taylor.
Wow. I need to hire you just to do my introductions for me. That was lovely. Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
I have been looking forward to our conversation. So this is great. I don't think there's any jinxing at all.
Well, I always like to clarify that out there. So, sent the energy straight. So, smooth sailing from here. And as always, you get the quirky fun of live. So, we're adaptable for that as well. So, so for those who may not be aware or familiar with you, Scott, could you share with the audience a little bit about your background? Because I just don't think I could do it justice.
I would love to. Um, so I come into this work as having had a shared death experience, which Michael, I hope we'll talk about in a little bit. And a shared death experience is one where a person who is making their final transition invites you to attend to them, to go with them into the light and experience what they're experiencing, as opposed, say, to a near death experience where it happens to you, and your physical body undergoes such trauma that it dies. And then your non-physical body lifts out, has an adventure, and comes back in. So I'm a shared death experiencer. And in trying to figure out what happened to me, because I have to tell you, that's nothing like I learned in the lexicon of the Presbyterian Church, the one I grew up in. So, in an effort for me to learn how to figure that out, what really happened to me, I pursued an academic career, and I studied near death experiences. I discovered how we present ourselves when we've had some sort of a traumatic experience in our life. So I got my doctorate at the University of St. Thomas, studying and asking the question of near-death experiencers: how do you live with what you know? And along the way, I also got a degree in divinity, and that was lovely. Um, and then I discovered the Monroe Institute. And the Monroe Institute, for those of you who don't know it, was founded by Bob Monroe. He was the very first person to write about out-of-body experiences. And he developed an institute where he could teach people about how to enter into and hold expanded states of awareness. That's a very cool thing. And I was a facilitator for them for 35 years and was their executive director for the last 2. I have been really active with the International Association for Near-Death Studies. The acronym is IANDS. And we have annual conventions. We just had one a little while ago in Scottsdale, Arizona. There's a spring symposium, and there's monthly meetings. I was on the board. I MC their international conferences. So really active in trying to understand this experience, because both near-death and shared death experiences are really similar, and they base themselves off of the same transitional experience. And then last but not least is the fact that I've taken my expertise and I am teaching people how to meditate using binaural beats and enter into those same places that near-death and shared death experiencers go to when they have their experience. And we don't have to have the trauma, or we don't have to be invited by somebody who's dying. We can do it all on our own. So that's the brief introduction. This is a world that I've been in for a long time, and let me just say, it's a little happier than some of the the pictures in your introduction, which are just a little spooky.
Yeah, well, having a paranormal background, I like to share that the paranormal is not just one thing; that it's kind of the unexplained, and so that's why I like how there's broad vision to it. And one thing you brought up, Scott, that and you mentioned wanting to talk about, I think is the perfect start to this episode, is your shared near death experience, because that is something new to me, and I am very interested to hear about this and how this works.
Sure. So I'll tell you my experience, because it's a pretty good example of what this whole genre of experience is like. Back in 1981, I was in love with a woman. Her name was Mary Frances Randall. Mary Fran and her son Nolan had been out sailing a beautiful summer day in southern Minnesota, and they were driving home, and they were involved in this horrific car accident. Mary Fran was killed outright, and Nolan, who just turned 7, suffered a mortal head wound, and it took him 6 days to make his transition. Luckily, we were in southern Minnesota, and so they were quickly rushed over to Mayo and Rochester. And the Mayo health system is just amazing, and they received wonderful care. But of course, it wasn't enough to save either one of them. The 6 days becomes important because Mary Fran was one of 9. And as a result, that gave people time to gather from all over the country. So, brothers and sisters and boyfriends and girlfriends and aunts and uncles and neighbors and friends and grandma, grandpa. And that's just her side. So there was a lot of people who were there holding vigil for Nolan. That is important because there was so many of us that Nolan had this small hospital room where he was all wired up. And we just made a decision that two of us would go in every 2 hours to be with him and talk with him. The nurses on the floor had told us that even though he was in a coma and would never come out of that coma, that hearing is the last sense to go. So it was important for us to talk to him, to tell him what's going on, and make him a part of any conversation. So we drew lots, and my lot was with Mary Fran's eldest sister, Jannie. And the two of us had the 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. shift on the morning of the 6th day. So we got in there and we brought his favorite storybook and we read him stories. And then we started telling, oh, Michael, we started telling him about what his uncles were doing. And Mary Fran's brothers had gone throughout the Mayo Health System about midnight and stolen all of the cushions off the couches and put them on the floor of the waiting room so that, people could lie down and get some sort of relief. You don't have to fall asleep in a chair. So it was quite the look. Anyway, so we're doing all this. We're telling him stories and funny things that are happening. And then about 4:45 in the morning, Jannie, who was a trained emergency room nurse, went to the end of a bed, looked at his charts, and then looked up and looked at all the myriad of monitors that were there. And she held her hand out to me and she said, "Scott, it's going to be soon. So I think it's time for us to say goodbye." And so we pulled up 2 chairs close to his head and we told him that he had been such a brave boy and he had fought so hard to be with us here in the physical world. But if his mother should come, meaning Mary Fran had died, remember, 6 days before,
Right.
that if Mary Fran should come, his mother should come and ask him to go with her, that would be the right thing to do, that he should be with his mother. And we ended by, telling him that we loved him dearly and that we would never forget him. And then our time was up and we left as the other team was coming in. Well, Michael, it wasn't more than 45 minutes later when the nurse on the floor came in and she said that his vitals were going down and that we should come in and if we wanted to be there when he made his transition. So this whole room filled with people, there had to be 40 of us at least, piled into this little hospital room, and they, just gathered around bedside. And for whatever reason, I was one of the very last people to enter into that room, and it's already 4 deep around the bed. And I went, well, this is nuts. So I just went over and sat on the windowsill next to Mary Fran's youngest brother, Willie. He was like right there. And we just waited. And, really there isn't much to do when you're holding vigil. It's quiet. You could hear people murmuring some prayers, but essentially you're just kind of in a meditative state. And I was watching, the heart monitor, and the heart monitor then slowed and slowed. And eventually, it just flatlined. And when Nolan flatlined, what I experienced was Mary Fran coming across the veil and scooping up her son out of his body. And they had this exquisite reunion, which surprised me. Not that it was an exquisite reunion, but it surprised me from the standpoint that I was able to feel what they were feeling. And then once that reunion was over, the two of them then turned to me, embraced me, and then the three of us left and went to the light. And when I entered into the light, it was the most extraordinary experience. It was like entering a sea of love and compassion, and it was joy, it was ecstasy, it was all things amazing and wonderful. And I felt, like connected to everything. But really, none of that, which is amazing and wonderful. But what was important to me was the fact that we were in the light, the three of us were there, and we could communicate with each other. And we had a chance to affirm our love and affection for each other. We had a chance to say a proper goodbye because the car accident was a long way from where I was at work. So, I wasn't there. And then, the three of us just had a chance to be together. And at some point, it felt complete. And it wasn't like, hey, I see you later, bub. It was more like we've done what we need to do, and everybody's in agreement. And then so the two of them turned and went further into the light, and I came back to my physical body sitting on the windowsill next to Willie. So that's part A of my story. I'm going to pause here for just a second, just to make sure if you get any questions, we could do that.
Well, one question that's coming to mind is there's a lot of times I'll hear in my experience, like minutes have passed here on the earth, but it feels like hours or days on the journey through the tunnel or in the light. Do you recollect if it was like 1 or 2 minutes but felt like half an hour with them? Or
You're absolutely right on that. So time is really fuzzy now, so I'm guessing that the time here in the physical was something like 5 minutes, maybe seven, tops 10, somewhere in there, 5 to 10 minutes. And on the other side, where I was with Mary Fran and Nolan, half hour is a really good guess. It was more than enough for us to communicate what we needed to bring some closure to our relationship.
and a lot of times you'll hear people that say, "Oh, I don't want my partner to feel like he can't do this and can't move on with someone else." Do you feel like she didn't want that for you, and so that's why she was like, "Hey, Scott, join us so we can have this moment, so we can share, and you can move on and maybe find someone else"?
Um, that's a really interesting question. Um, Nobody's ever asked me that before. Thank you. Um, let's see. I had the sense that it was that they had the ability to give me a gift, and the gift was for me to have that last bit of time with them before we moved on with our lives. And so a lot of things happened in our time together. One of which was, as you so rightly noted, there was there was closure to the relationship, and yeah, that becomes really important because the love of my life is my wife Ann. We've been married for 21 years, and it's terrific. We have a grand time, and that never would have been possible had you know Mary Fran and Nolan left it open like that. Um, and it was also a great gift from the standpoint of it showed me something that I never knew existed. Like I said, in the Presbyterian church, they don't talk about things like, the ability to witness somebody coming across the veil and scooping them out of their physical body, her son out of his physical body, and being able to communicate in that space, and for me to enter into that space. And so it profoundly changed my life, from this one really important point, which was when I got done and I was back fully in my physical body and reflecting on what happened. I had been in the light with Mary Fran and Nolan, and I absolutely knew that if I had been there once, I could go back and do it again. And I just had to figure out how. How do you do that? And so that set me off on a lifelong quest to explore the non-physical universe and how it works and why it works the way it does, and how to enter into those states and hold and then navigate around in the non-physical universe. So they opened up for me, something that became my life's passion, and has had a profound effect on who I am as an individual. And I got to meet some really cool people. So yeah, it's all good.
And one thing I like is, before we go on, is I want to note and observe is you had said like you wanted him to know that he would always be remembered. And look at now, it's how many years later, and we're still sharing his story. So you're keeping your word to him, which I think is really beautiful. And, he probably is where he's at, looking down and going, yeah, Scott, you said you were going to do that and you're doing it. So thank you for that.
And his family, Mary Fran's brothers and sisters, some of them, when they had children later, um, he was their namesake. So there's a Mary Fran in the family who's roughly his age, a little bit younger, a Nolan. And so, that legacy lives on because those stories live on. And you're right. I tell stories about Nolan all the time. So um, I've kept my word. Right, Nolan?
So I think that's beautiful. And so you had mentioned that was part one of the story. So what's part two?
Part two is that um, I'm sitting there on the windowsill, and I am in the white, or I'm sorry, I'm in the light with Mary Fran and Nolan, and we're communicating with each other. And when that's going on, I'm there. 100% of my attention is there with them in the light, and my physical body, which is sitting on the windowsill, I have 100% consciousness of what's going on in the room. And so what's going on in the room for me is I'm there sitting on the windowsill, but it's like the light of the universe is inside my physical body and it's trying to burst out. And the place where you can see it most is in my face, because it was just joy. And I had this big grin on my face, and Michael, if anybody had looked at me at that moment, they would have completely misunderstood my body language, my facial expression. And I knew it. So I did the only thing I could think of, which was to cover my face with my hands. And I remained that way the whole time until I, um, came back and the both parts of me were settled in, and then I could take my hands off, and I could then um, be in the room with the other grieving relatives and do what you do when Mary Fran had died 6 days before, and Nolan had just passed away. So there was lots of hugging and crying and family being together, supporting each other. It was quite emotional, and I would I do know how to add, and that is that um, it wasn't like my consciousness was split between the two. It was like my whole consciousness, all of it was in the light, and my whole consciousness was in the room with the grieving relatives. I was in two places at the same time, and I didn't have a chance to really think about it until later. And there was no literature written about shared death experiences then, and um, so I just was quiet about it. But later, I came up with a term for it, called it bilocation, where you are fully one place and fully another. And to help explain what that's like, because it's really unusual. So that's part B. There's one more part. I'm pausing just for you.
Well, the one thing I would want to point out is, how you were saying you covered your face to, hide the grin. And I think that was perfect because even when you're sad, you tend to cover your face to hide the tears and everything. So it didn't draw attention to you. Where some people are like, oh, I need to hide the fact I'm doing this. So you may turn and then everyone's going to turn and look at you and be like, why are you turning? What are you doing? And then go, wait, why are you smiling? And so it's like you were so in the moment that you knew what to do to keep the flow of being in the room and everybody doing what they're doing and you doing what you're doing. So I think that was clever and wise of a movement.
Well, you bring up the point that that gesture, I hadn't thought of it till just you said it, but that gesture is very much a privacy gesture. It's like I'm in my grief. Give me a moment. I don't get that anybody would come up and like separate my hands and try to give me a hug at that moment.
Right.
It's just it's kind of yeah, it's a protecto thing, and just like give me a moment. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, and I like how you coined it as the bilocate because I have once in my life, and I mentioned to Scott before we got started, I may throw in a personal experience. So I was like, wasn't sure how I would work it in, but this seems like an opportune moment because I'm curious your take on it. Is I had no idea about this, but I was talking with someone on the other side of the country on the East Coast, and I'm in Texas. So, nowhere near there. And we were talking. I went to sleep. And when I woke up, she goes, "Thank you for coming by and stopping by and talking to me some more." And I said, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "I saw you." I said, "Well, what was I wearing?" She described exactly what I was wearing to sleep that night. And she was like describing my hair just like it was. So it's like I really was there. And she said she could feel me there. Like she could feel my hug.
Oh,
And
so it was corporeal. Oh
yeah.
my. Wow. Yeah,
And
that doesn't
so,
that doesn't happen that often. I've only talked to a couple of people that
yeah,
this you're
I've
number
never
3,
figured
so
out how to do that again. But if I'm wondering if it's similar to your experience of being with Nolan and his mom, Mary Fran, if her spirit needed me so much that it just pulled me over and said, "We're going to share this experience." And so it caused the bilocate.
Well, the research shows that, um, people ask the question, well, why does it happen to you and not to me? This shared death thing. And we now know the answer, more or less. And that is that first off, you need to have a heart connection with the other person. And I certainly had that with both Mary Fran and Nolan. Um, the the second is that you need to be available, meaning I was just sitting there on the windowsill, um, kind of in a meditative state, just watching the heart monitor. So I was available. I wasn't driving or actively grieving or talking in a group. I was available for that to come in. And the third, which is, I think, the most important, is that um, both Mary Fran and Nolan invited me to go with them. I mean, it's hard from this standpoint to project your consciousness into another realm precisely, without any training or whatever, but being invited to come over onto the other side and accompany Nolan as he's making his final transition um, seems to be a key component. So back to your experience, it fits right in because there was a heart connection. You wanted to see her, she wanted to see you, and um, that there must have been this mutual invitation, invitee, so that you could go and be, um, with her. So, um, congrats. That's a cool thing. Develop that skill.
So, so that raises, you mentioned that, and that raises to the question I was about to ask is, how do you develop that skill? Because it's not like I can go to school and take a course on bilocation.
Well, actually, you can.
Really?
Yeah. I'm faculty member on the Shift Network, and I've got 4 courses on the Shift Network that are all about bilocation and how you enter into expanded states of consciousness, hold them, and then have the tools to navigate in that space so that you can learn what you want to learn. And it is benefited greatly by the use of binaural beats. You mentioned that some of your other guests have talked about binaural beats, but they're really effective at helping you enter into expanded states. And then because you can tweak binaural beats, um, you can have them be at such a vibration that it's easier to do things. So, what am I talking about? Okay, so when you lift out of your body for the last time, very often in a near death experience, there's a tunnel that leads you from the physical world into the non physical world. It's a nice metaphor of transition. And that exists at a certain frequency, which you can get pretty close to using binaural beats. And then once through the tunnel, you enter into one of the 3 lights that near death experiencers encounter. So there's the white light, the black light, and the clear light. And each one of those is a slightly different frequency, and people have different kinds of experiences when they enter either into the black, white, or clear light. And then you want to have a life review, you want to meet a divine being, you want to go to that area of life between lives. All of those exist on different frequencies. And so you can use binaural beats to get you close to those frequencies, and then the rest is your intent on what you'd like to do and who you'd like to contact, and it's really the intent that drives the whole thing. But binaural beats can kind of give you a boost, give you kind of a hand up, so to speak.
Right, and the binaural beats too, I remember from when I was using some of them, they can be targeted to go into the theta wave state or the delta wave state or alpha state. So is that kind of what you're referring to, like with the colors, is the different wavelengths, or
Yeah,
is that
it's a different vibratory. Each one of them is a different vibratory state, and those pure states of, delta, data, excuse me, delta, beta, those are helpful. But Bob Monroe, who is the one who actually really developed binaural beats for use in meditation and expanded states of consciousness, his genius was the mix of those frequencies and how you shift the mix to get where you want to go. And so the ones that he developed, called hemisync, were mixes of frequencies that were targeted towards specific states. So if you're interested in doing out of body travel, for instance, well, there's a state for that, and it's really helpful to kind of get you in that right space. If you want to go, like I said, if you want to go visit the dead relatives, there's a mix for that. And so I think that's what we're all really grateful to him for, is this ability that he saw to really kind of do these cake mixes of these blends, better word, these blends that allow us to enter into and hold these states of being.
right? And one thing I think was worth noting, we were talking about before we started, was these binaural beats and the hemisyncs and the meta musics. They're designed to be low tone, like background noise, not like your radio where you crank it and you're like feeling the vibration of the bass drums. So I
Yeah,
feel like,
feeling the beat is fun, but it doesn't really get you where you want to go. All of these frequencies are subaudible, so our human ear really can't hear them because they're below that. And but what Bob would do is he would create music tracks, or he would create sound patterns that he could then embed the hemisync into. And so you might be listening to the sound of ocean surf, for instance, and underneath are the hemisync tones. So, louder is not better. You just kind of play it, at a low level. Usually, when I do the work, they're guided meditations. So it's like you can hear my voice at a low, comfortable level. You shouldn't strain to hear it, and it shouldn't be, super loud. I should not be yelling in your ear. And so that's the kind of the mode. So it's just you put on the headphones and listen carefully, or listen comfortably. That's the word I want.
okay. And so now you got me curious what the third part is.
All right. Well, I love this part of the story. So we have to flash forward 15 years from the accident. And I'm now doing my doctoral work at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul. For those of you who don't know, Minnesota's largest private university is called the University of St. Thomas. So I'm doing my doctoral work, and I'm studying near-death experiences and how people change as a result of them. How do they live with what they know? And I'm having trouble finding people to interview because I keep running up against HIPAA laws. And so I can't have doctors or nurses or hospice workers, tell me, who's had an experience and who hasn't. So I got to find another way. So one of the things I did was I wrote all the women in Mary Fran's family because each one of them were involved in healthcare in some way and asking if they knew somebody that I could interview. Well, one of them wrote back. And by the way, she wants to remain anonymous. So I'm just going to call her the sister. So this sister writes back and says, well, Scott, I had one of these experiences, one of these near-death experiences, and I think you should interview me. Well, a little taken aback. I said, great. So we get together and I do the professional academic thing. I got my recording device and my list of questions and we go through her story, which is fun. And then afterwards, I looked at her and said, something really unusual happened to me when Nolan made his transition. And I wonder if anything unusual happened to you too. And the sister looked at me and her eyes got just big as saucers. Taking that as a yes, I turned the recorder back on again and told her, tell you what, why don't you tell me your story first? And then I'll tell you my story and then we'll compare notes. This is what she told me. She said, Scott, I remember it absolutely, very vividly, because I was standing on next to the bed. I was in the front row and I could look at you because you were sitting on the windowsill next to Willie. I said, yep, that's right. And he says, all of us were standing there bedside. And when Nolan flatlined, what I experienced, meaning the sister, what I experienced was Mary Fran coming across the veil, scooping Nolan up out of his physical body. The two of them had this exquisite reunion of which I was able to participate. Then the two of them turned to me, and the three of us left and went into the light where we had a chance to affirm our love and affection for each other. We had a chance to say goodbye. We had a chance to hang out for a while. And then when it felt complete, they turned and went further into light, and I came back to my physical body. Michael, she used almost exactly the same words, word for word, that I used in describing my experience. And in an instant, if I had any doubts that this was real, they just vanished because there's no way that she could have known my story because I didn't tell anybody until after I actually after I finished my whole doctoral work. And she couldn't have known. And so it was a real gift for me to know that somebody else had exactly the same experience that I did. So we were witnesses for each other. My doubts disappeared. Her doubts disappeared because we both, I mean, you're pretty sure of what happened, but good grief. I mean, this is so unusual. It's so outside the ability of language to describe it that we neither one of us had really talked to anybody about it. So I was a witness for her. She was a witness for me. And it's one of the rare shared death experiences. I'm not sure that's a term, but I'm going with it.
Man, I can say I got chills when I heard the story and what she said. And the one thing I find interesting too to note is this is happening for you and her simultaneously, and yet you never see each other. And I
Yep.
feel like that was because if you had, I feel like it might have distracted and be going, wait, you're here. Wait, you're here. Where's everybody else? What's going on? And you'd start to think what's going on. So I think that's the beauty of why they made it your threesome, her threesome, so that there was no, okay, who else is coming, or who else is going to have this experience. And you didn't go and say to Willie, go, hey Willie, I saw you, up there, what did you think about that? And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it was also a confirmation that we exist outside of time and space. So, the two of us could have these simultaneous experiences, but, they're, slightly off in dimension, or they're slightly off in time. The ability to bilocate. I was in my body in the hospital room, and I was with them. Well, what's not to say that they can't be with me and over here be with the sister doing the same thing that they were bilocating. I mean, it just, now you start to get into, ooh, this is tough stuff. Trying to wrap your head around it from
Yeah.
a 3D world, and you're trying to describe what happens in a 5D world. Yeah, it's a toughie.
Yeah, I think that's where they might start going into like quantum entanglements and all that. And it's like, whoa, 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 hold up. Let's hit the brake here.
Yep.
We're not trying to redefine science here. But yeah, but I find it, also very interesting how everything that's happened for you seems to be in alignment to helping you to the next step and the next step. And so not many people that I know and talk with are like so in tune and going, okay, so this happened, so now let me go try this and study this. And so I find it interesting how that worked for you, to where you had the experience, you then were like, I want to recreate the experience, study how to recreate the experience, come up with the answer. And it's like, wow, how open and guided you were.
Well, you make it sound so logical and linear. It didn't feel like that at the time because, all right, so you'll you'll appreciate this. So my first instinct was, okay, I was lifted up into this realm. Where else could I do that on the planet? You know, where else could I go that could? So I said, well, shoot. I mean, there's all these ancient sacred sites. So maybe there's some juju there that will help propel me back into that space again. So I went to Stonehenge. I went to Machu Picchu. I went to the Great Pyramids, the Sphinx, the Oracle of Delphi. And I have to say, I go to those sites and essentially it was nada. It's just like nothing. I got a little something, but nothing like what was needed. The nice thing was I had some perfectly wonderful vacations. So that part was good. So then it was more active. I said, okay, maybe I need to do something more active. And I studied with shamans in North America and South America. I went to study with the Omoto religion in Japan. I took up meditation, your standard TM meditation. And each one of those helped build on the other, but it really wasn't until I was introduced to the Monroe Institute and binaural beats that really, boom, propelled me, took me where I wanted to go. And in their The first class that you take at Monroe is one called Gateway. It's a fabulous class, and it always works, always. I was able to reconnect with Mary Fran. It was briefly, but it was clearly Mary Fran. And we had a chance to communicate with one another. And then I went back into took another class, which is called Guidelines, which is all about establishing a relationship with a non-physical being, whether it's your guide, or in this case, I was looking for Mary Fran and Nolan. I was able to do both. I got a chance to meet my guides, plural, and I got a chance to, hang out with Mary Fran and Nolan and establish how we could be together and communicate with each other. And the rest is history. They're still part of my life.
Right.
So there's one point that I'd like to bring up. Hang on just a second. I got a frog in my throat.
Well, while you're drinking that, let me make this quick observation I noticed is like you were saying, it wasn't such a fluid linear path. And I would say my metaphysical mind is going, well, each one of those places you went to, each person you studied with was the path, so that when you met Monroe, you would be like, this is it. Boom, the light switch is on. Good to go, because chances, we never know if you hadn't done all that work and you met Robert Monroe, if you would have been like, I don't know, maybe not, and maybe not so receptive. So maybe that was your linear path, though,
Yeah,
having to go through all that.
fair enough. So the point I wanted to make was, some people ask me, well, what did Mary Fran say, or what did Nolan say when you got together again up in the light? And this is where I very sincerely tell people, I am so glad that it was not in English. It was telepathy. It was a form of communication that is so complete that that you can understand what they were trying to say in its fullness. One of the things that English has, well, frankly, all spoken language, is that it takes a word takes and puts boundaries on a concept. And that's what we need when we're trying to communicate with each other. But in that state, you don't need those boundaries. What you need is the true essence of what it is that they're saying. And so if Mary Fran tells me, I love you, that includes, all the experiences that we had when we were together and all of the emotions that came with that. It includes the emotions right then in that moment with the two of us being with each other in that moment in time. And it also includes, all the sorrow and the loss for what will not be in the future. And all of that is communicated in an instant. And so if you're spending, a half an hour in that space, like we talked about before, think of what it is that you could talk that you can communicate with each other, because it would take, books and books to write it all down. And yet it just occurs in an instant. So, in the literature, when they talk about near-death experiences and they talk about shared death experiences, one of the first descriptors they use is the word ineffable, which is a great English word that means we don't have English words for this. And I'm trying to describe, what that communication was like. And it's so far superior to what happens with spoken language. I mean, we could never have done that using words, but we could, it's like heart to heart. And it's an extraordinary way to be. And it opened up for me this idea that when we're in these altered states, our modes of perception are not just the non-physical duplicates of our physical senses, seeing, smelling, touch, taste, hearing, those exist, and so many others. And so we've identified 10 in the work that we've done. And all of them are valid. Emotions is one. Intuition is another, where you just get a concept, boom. You just understand there's no beginning and no end. There's this wonderful thing called synesthesia, which is where your senses cross. So you might smell a color, so red comes with a particular, you interpret it as a scent. And when it happens to you at first, it's really confusing. And then after a while you go, oh, that's synesthesia. So not only is it visual, but it may have a tactile sense associated with that color. There might be a smell associated with that color. So it's much fuller. It gets close to that type of communication that comes with telepathy. Right. So I wanted to get that across, because it's when people start to read experiencers of shared death and near-death experiencers, they're reading something. Usually the accounts are changed so that they're understandable for people here in the three-dimensional universe. Right. And it's the best you can do. And it's not entirely accurate, and we don't have words to make it accurate. So you do the best you can.
Right. And traveling on the astral plane, I've learned that a lot of the beings and a lot of the cultures and everything, what I come to understand it is use the language of light. So
yeah,
that's how you communicate. And what I was hearing while you were sharing your story of what how would you describe the communication, what came to my mind was, like, there's the language of light, there's the language of love. And so maybe that's what that was. And I don't mean, it seems like it fits, but I don't know enough about what the language of love is to say, yeah, that's what you were speaking. But and I love when I get this stuff in my head that pops in, like these ideas, and it's like, where did that come from? what what am I supposed to do with that? It's like, yeah.
Well, if you're gonna geek out on physics, I think most physicists nowadays have come to the conclusion that the most fundamental thing that our universe is made up of is consciousness. Everything arises from consciousness, and that's the thing that brings into form what we have here in the physical world. And I think they're a little shy on that description, because in my experience, that consciousness that undergirds everything in the universe, physical and non-physical, is that it's a loving consciousness. And that loving nature of it helps define, who we are in this wonderful place that we get to exist in. So so call it the language of light and love. I'm good with that. Lots of definitions to get to the same thing.
I agree. And we're approaching the end of the hour, so I don't know if you were needing to go or if you had time for another question or two.
Sure, I'll take another question, and then, well, it's late here on the East Coast, so
Right. Yeah, and I don't, and it's a Tuesday night, so it's not like it's Friday and it's the weekend. So, my last question to you along these lines is, what do you feel like has been the biggest impact of this on your current life, like your current relationships and everything? And also, you know, what you would, if somebody was wanting to get into this, how would they get into it? I know you mentioned your courseworks and everything, but I'm meaning like if they feel like they could do it, how do they nurture that?
yep. So the biggest impact on me has been um, this idea that we are multidimensional beings, that we exist on all levels of existence at the same time. And what we are doing when we travel the non physical universe is that we're actually just focusing that part of our consciousness on that part that is in the light with Mary Fran and Nolan, or is in that area of life between lives, or here in the physical. That's where my attention is right now. And and that when we're in those spaces, there is nothing more powerful than love. It is the finest vibration, and it allows us to do and manifest everything that's out there. So that's what it's meant to me. And it means that when you live here in the physical universe, it not only am I paying attention to the physical stuff around me, but how do I present myself to the world? Am I that loving being? Am I using what I know is the foundation of the universe? Am I connected to that? Am I bringing that forth? Because I think that's really important. So, how do people find out about if they want to pursue this? I think the easiest way is for them to go to my website, near-death-meditations.com. Let me repeat that, near-death-meditations, plural.com. And there is a whole raft of resources that are available to you. And I think the easiest and quickest way to learn about the non physical universe and who we are as beings here, both in the physical and all the other dimensions, is to have a guide. He'll save you years and years of searching. And so there's resources there that can, as easy as buying the CDs that are sitting there in the background, or taking courses, or there's a reading list if you're interested in the scientific part. That's there too. So that's what I recommend is finding somebody who can guide you through this maze. It'll make your trip a lot shorter, and and then you'll achieve the results that you want more quickly, and then um, you'll have the skills to do the exploration on your own. And you don't need people like me. You just, you know, you learn the skills and off you go. And isn't that a wonderful thing that you have agency? So it's um, the nurturing of curiosity and the nurturing of agency. That's the ticket.
I love it. And so I want to thank you for coming on the show and thank you for sharing your story and your experience with us. It's been a true pleasure and I've learned a lot. So thank you for that.
Well, I think it's important that we actually stuck with the idea about the energy that surrounds us. I mean,
Yeah.
this loving energy, this ability to change our energetic states. I think we're right on here, Michael. So thank you for the invitation. Really nice to have our conversation with you.
Yes, and as I was mentioning to you, I think it was before we went live that there's no accidents to why things happen, and so you pointing that out is like, yeah, there's no accident. You're on the show that the title is. So thank you for that. Thank you to the audience. And Scott, I get a lot of requests for this one question that's the ultimate last question of the night. And that is from your personal experience and life. From you can start wherever and go wherever. What is a golden nugget that you would like to leave the audience with?
Hmm. That's kind of like asking, what's your purpose in life, and what's your mission in life? And um, I think it just boils down to love and to learn. And this is an amazing universe that we are in that allows us to use our curiosity and our agency in order to figure out how to live in a world of duality and love in a way that's appropriate for you and your family and for the community that we're in. um, I think that's critical in times, our times right now. So yeah, to love and to learn.
I
Easy.
love it. So, from the energy that surrounds us to all of you, make it a wonderful evening, day, night, afternoon. And if you're asleep, feel free to wake up and watch the show and see what you missed. And as Scott pointed out, take each day and fill it with love and learning. And, you know, one thing I'm reminded of is as you learn, things become more like choices. And the beauty of a choice is they're not concrete. So if you make a choice and decide this isn't the choice you want, simply make a new one. With
Amen.
that, with that, I'm going to say good night to everyone. And thank you again to Scott for a lovely episode.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you.
Yep. Good night, everyone.